Friends, Nayaswami Hriman here again. This is part 4 of what was supposed to be 5 parts on the creation, specifically the Bible, Genesis, and Yogananda's interpretations. Okay, now we just finished the part before this, part 3, talking about the Holy Trinity, the 3 aspects of God: God the Father beyond creation, God as the creation, and God within the creation. Now, I'd like to turn to another aspect of creation, and it's related to Adam and Eve. And so it has to do with the bifurcation when God created the universe and created this illusion I talked about much earlier in this series, and created the separation, you might say, of himself in the Trinity, meaning the God within the creation as opposed to God as the creation. That bifurcation is the bifurcation between consciousness and matter. And that core duality, in part 3 I had promised to talk about duality. I never got to it. But duality is in effect from the center of rest of the spirit beyond creation, in the act of creation, not just in the act of creating, but also in the act of sustaining the creation continually, is the motion from a center of rest from one side to the other, giving rise to duality and the spectrum of duality. Sort of like a pendulum. You know, if you hold a pendulum and it goes back and forth, and you look at the bar that's the center of the pendulum, from side to side, at the bottom it swings widely, but at the top it moves very little. And so the pendulum is an apt symbol for the forms of creation. So the solid forms of creation, as well as the extremes of emotions and so on, would be represented by the wide range of the arc of the swing of the pendulum at the bottom. But way at the top, and in the spectrum from top to bottom, we have just a small amount of movement. And so that small amount of movement is very close to the source of the movement, to spirit. So along this pendulum, we have different rates of vibration. We have the appearance of tangible things, and then things become increasingly more subtle, all the way to thought and stillness, and very close then to the spirit beyond creation. In any case, that movement back and forth from a center of rest is both what creates the illusion, but is the duality necessary to create the delusion. And one of the very first archetypal, primordial forms of duality that took place is epitomized by, conceptualized at least, by God as the creation, as the Om vibration, as the Divine Mother, in, let's say, representing all the things that we can see, just to keep it simple. Whereas the only begotten Son, as I said in the last part, is the intelligence, the consciousness, invisible, unseen, and perfectly still within that creation. And so that bifurcation between consciousness and matter is elemental, and it takes form, or is represented in a metaphorical way, by reason and feeling, perception and movement, by male and female. And this is part of the key of Yogananda's commentaries on the Adam and Eve story. Now, it's a very deep story and means many things. For example, original sin. You know, there's many aspects to it. I suspect with this broadcast and the next one, the 5th one, it'll be as much as I can possibly do. And so when we come to Adam and Eve, they are symbolic of the first man and woman. Yogananda said that we would never find the missing link. Now, during his lifetime, and even today, I suppose, there is still a great controversy about how creation took place. And so, you can see it as the first man and woman, or you can see it as the way in which each of us in life, each of us are an Adam or an Eve. And inasmuch as Adam and Eve, Yogananda say, are symbolic of these two elements of perception and feeling, perception, thought and movement, stillness and movement, male and female, we actually have these within us. So Adam and Eve are in fact representative of the two halves of our consciousness, just as the bifurcation of the universe into that which is invisible as thought and consciousness, and that which is visible. Now, that which is visible takes two forms. There's what we see in our limited range of vision, and then there's that which is measurable as subtle energy and electrons and radio waves and things like that. But that's for a different discussion. But consciousness as opposed to the creation itself, the vibratory, anything that's vibrating in creation, whether seen or unseen. And so Adam and Eve are symbolic of that, but it's quite possible that according to the teaching of the yugas, the ages of the gold and silver, bronze and iron age, the high age, it may well be that the myth or teaching of Adam and Eve is a reference to a high golden age in which humanity was God realized. And the fall from that God realization, which the teaching of the yugas tell us takes place in the descending arc of 12,000 years from the golden age all the way down to the iron age, may be that the fall takes place as humanity begins to lose that contact and to rebel. Okay? There are many different ways to interpret that other than just imagining a man and a woman being created. Yogananda also said, so that has other ramifications, and we don't need to decide on that. Yogananda largely took the Bible at face value. He wasn't interested, apparently, in being a scholar, and he wasn't interested in arguing with the Bible or criticizing it. He sought to show how it might apply to Sanatana Dharma, how it might apply to a more universal view of life. And so he didn't nitpick the details. He did say that the Genesis teaching that Adam and Eve were formed of the dust of the earth signifies that the human body was a conscious creation of God. Now, did he intervene? Well, that's the implication, both in Yogananda's words and in the story itself. I think personally, whether or not that's true, I have no way of knowing, but I think personally he was trying to counter the materialistic science that said that humans evolved from apes and would be looking for the missing link. And Yogananda declared they would never find a missing link because of this divine intervention. Whatever the cause, I think he was trying to make the point that we are not just a blind, dumb, and random manifestation of the law of survival, the survival of the fittest, or any of the other things that materialistic science seems to throw at us. There's nothing wrong with wanting to survive. It's an obvious thing, but it doesn't really answer the question, why and for what purpose? And so mere survival in sheer agony isn't anything particularly worthwhile. So anyway, that's a different story. But he accepted the basic idea that Adam and Eve were the first parents. In some of his writings, he did seem to see it as a metaphor. So he was being pretty cagey on the whole point, I'd say. Because from an Oriental or Eastern or Indian or Hindu perspective, our original sin, our fall, is the equivalent of past life bad karma. I mean, it's not really any different. And so it doesn't really much matter. And as Swami Kriyananda put it so well and bluntly in his now famous classic book, The Art and Science of Raja Yoga, most people wouldn't make any other choice. Most people wouldn't have it any other way, because they want this world. They want the pleasures and possessions and status that they imagine the world will give them, and will imagine further yet that will make them happy. And so it is that we'll have to get to this, the Satan and evil and suffering bit here at some point, so I do need to keep my remarks pretty focused. Pardon me 1 minute. In any case, no matter how it happened, here we are. And as Kriyananda put it, the most important thing about how we got here is what do we do about it? And as Yogananda put it, in trying to help people to understand, especially when they were suffering, the why of things, he said, you will know when you will know. When you meet the maker of creation, when you meet the creator, then you can ask him all these big questions. But again, as I said on the first one, that's not very satisfying, and he himself would argue with Divine Mother about the why and so forth. So whether it's bad karma from the past, whether it's choices we make, and then the last point I want to make on this is that Yogananda used the analogy, and a very apt and present one, that when we grow up and go through puberty, that too, we are Adam and Eve's playing together in the innocence of childhood, and then at that moment, as we move, not moment, but as we move into teenage years, we become aware of our nakedness, as it says in chapter 2 of Genesis. We become aware of boys and girls. We become aware of the opposite sex, etc. And so there comes into the body, if you will, this awakening. Now, there's a lot more I can add, and I think I'm going to have to run out of time here. But I will talk now specifically in part 5 about the Adam and Eve story and that nasty old serpent and that delicious looking apple and that forbidden tree of life and so forth. Okay, so here we go.